I think we can start then. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining today on this talk and being here today. This is this is our third in the series of talks on safety matters to her. And just for everybody's knowledge, this is a talk that we are conducting as part of our MA Service Design program. We are a group of service design students who are actually trying to tackle systemic issues through this platform, by addressing them, by bringing out voices to the forefront. That kind of shed light on a parallel or a different perspective on systemic problems, problems or systemic views on problems that kind of showcase the fact that there are certain nuances to problems, like safety, for instance. And today, to talk about one such nuance, we have Farah Bashir. She is the author of Rumours of Spring, a girlhood in Kashmir, and she grew up in Kashmir, and which is basically a heavily militarized area in India, something that has been the center of conflict for several years, decades now, and it has been seeing a lot of systemic oppression and a lot of issues that the people there face. But of course, I'm perhaps not the best person to talk about it. Maybe it's better to hear it from Farah herself. And she's written about it in her book. And so I would want to give the floor to Farah to talk about the issue, and then maybe we can go forward with the talk. Over to you, Farah.
Thank you, Musa. Hi, everyone. Hi. Good afternoon. So thanks, Musa. About a little bit of introduction between on Kashmir. So Kashmir is a contested region between India and Pakistan, and a bit lies with China. And it's like you rightly said, the conflict has been going on for the last 7 decades. I mean, it's something that the partition between India and Pakistan was like it's an unresolved child from that partition. So there is a promise of plebiscite, there is a promise of self-determination, but that hasn't happened. And multiple governments formed in India and have sort of, the stance has been changed, but really the promises haven't been kept. So that's one political aspect of it. And there is, like you rightly said, it's densely militarized. It's one of the most militarized zones, at least was till about 10 years ago in the world, before Iraq took over. And then a part of it is also with Pakistan, which is called Pakistan administered or Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And a small little territory also lies with China. So it's at a nuclear flashpoint between three important players in South Asia or countries in South Asia, powers in South Asia. So from that point, it becomes it's an important territory, and therefore, and it's also, like I said, heavily contested. So and there's a lot has been written about it. People are talking about it. There is now, for the first time, the last 10, 15 years, we're seeing literature coming out of Kashmir, which is what my book is a part of, where Kashmiris are talking, because the territory has been largely seen as a bipartisan issue between India and Pakistan. But what the self-determination or plebiscite is all about, Kashmiris having a say at the table. So that's where, I mean, this voice becomes a Kashmiri's voice, a Kashmiri woman's voice. And so that's the short introduction on the geopolitical part of it.
Right. And of course, the geopolitics of it is obviously just the surface of it, right? There's obviously, when you go into the depth of it, there's, the human impact, the emotional impact, the toll that it takes, having lived in a certain environment of this sort. And of course, how writing itself kind of provides a way to, I don't know if it's coming to terms with it, but it's almost like, bringing it out, talking about it, and that really helps. And that's something that maybe that's a dialogue, and that's a conversation that needs to happen more with the larger world. And we are hoping as designers to take these conversations further, to enable these conversations, etc. And particularly with right now with the context of feeling about safety, because we think about it, right? What connotation would feeling safe have for you? I mean, I imagine it must be different from the experience of others who had the privilege of living in an environment free of such conflict, right? So maybe you want to talk about that a little bit?
See, I thought a lot about this question. When what does safety mean for people growing up in a conflict zone? That is what you are seeing all the time.
Yeah.
So I've lived in I've lived in Kashmir. My childhood, young adult age was in Kashmir. Then I went to Singapore, which is a complete contrast, which is so safe for women. And now I live in Delhi, which is so unsafe for women. So I've lived in very three different contrasting regions. And in Kashmir, actually, it's not about safety, it's survival. It's really about survival. Safety is something that you're seeking all the time. You want to be safe, but it's literally about, have you survived one day to sort of wake up the next day and take that day as it comes. So safety is a very abstract concept. There are degrees of being safe. You could stay at home and still not be safe. I have The book talks about many such instances where you're home, where you're indoors, but there is no. I mean, there's a chapter on my friend's grandmother. She woke up in the middle of the night. She was an asthmatic patient, and she was asthma patient, and she woke up and she wanted to open the window, and as luck would have it, she was hit by a stray bullet, and she just died. So that in one of the chapters, my grandmother, who was again an asthmatic patient, she had asthma. She used to literally struggle for fresh air, but we weren't able to open the windows. So it's largely about survival because homes aren't safe, courtyards aren't safe, schools aren't safe, school buses aren't safe. So a lot of us who've been through this pandemic in the last 1 year, we've also seen home is the safest. But when I think of Kashmir, home is really not safe. I mean, there are these search and cordon and search operations where, because in Kashmir, military and paramilitary from India, they are covered under AFSPA, which is a law that like basically gives them blanket protection. It's called Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which means you can walk into any house, search without a warrant, ransack the whole place. So in the middle of the night, if you hear a knock at the door, you don't know, anyone can barge in. So bolts mean nothing, doors mean nothing, gates mean nothing. So safety is a very unique concept. I mean, it's something like you aspire to having like a safe place somewhere in Kashmir. So as a woman, it was largely around survival. Because when I went to Singapore, it was such a contrast. I used to work as a journalist there with Reuters, and I used to work in shifts, right? So night shift at around 4 in the morning, when all the markets used to be sort of the desks used to be quiet. I used to walk down. Reuters has an office in a very secluded part of Singapore. It's almost in a jungle, and I used to walk down a kilometer or a kilometer and a half to get a morning snack or something to eat. That is something that was literally a dream. That would I be able to walk like that ever in Kashmir? Because I have largely seen night curfews when I was growing up. So after 5:36, there was no way you could go out, and there was walking outside without a question. In Singapore, you get up 2 a.m. You just walk on the streets and you're safe. So safety for women is also something. It's in your mind also. How safe do you feel? It's not a physical thing. Like, you can be a woman on the streets of Delhi in the poshest areas, but would you feel the same feeling of safety as you feel in Singapore? Probably not. Because no area is devoid of the possibility of an incident happening to a woman. So again, I see the grades of safety between Delhi and Singapore, but I really see survival and survival and women wanting to become invisible in a in a zone like Kashmir. I have a short passage that I wanted to read out to give you a context that might sort of, if I may.
Yes, please.
So I read from this chapter, it's called I Miss Walking. I mean, these are some issues that I've been thinking of, walking, something as basic, because pandemic has also taken us back to those days where something as basic as walking, you miss it because you can't go for a walk down, you get into lockdown. So this is one, it is from the chapter I Miss Walking. So it's basically, okay. On one rare day, our school bus reached Burkadal without many detours. I wanted to visit father's shop to get my daily pocket money from him. So I alighted there along with two other girls. It was eerily quiet for an afternoon. Being a part of the bustling business district, Burkadal used to be a busy junction. But that day it was dotted with one-ton army trucks and other armored vehicles. The shutters of some shops were rolled down, while some had theirs half open. The two other girls, Sabia and Sania, who were sisters and much younger to me, lived nearby. Sabia, the younger one with a freckled nose and curly red hair, started sobbing. Sania held her hand tightly, looked towards the street, stiffened her gait, and walked hurriedly into a narrow alley. They both disappeared from my sight. I was all by myself. The streets I had walked every day suddenly seemed threatening. I had a kilometer to walk from father's shop to reach home. On an ordinary day, I would usually go to father's shop, barely a minute long walk from the bus stop, to take some money from him, buy chestnuts that I would eat on my way home. But I had to be careful about not eating too much on the way, as Bob, who's my grandmother, would wait with steaming hot rice and mutton curry for me in a cairns. That day, I felt like I had no legs, as if they had been blown off. Slowly, I walked to the half shut shop of ours and saw neither father nor Ramzan Kak inside. My heart sank. There was no one on the streets whom I could have asked about their whereabouts. All the men had probably been assembled somewhere. There were just the troops around. And what would I ask them? Have you seen my father? How does one even talk to the men in uniform? I could hear my heart beat outside of my body with warm tears welling up my eyes. My vision blurred. I took my school bag from my shoulders and hugged it instead. On the deserted streets of my neighborhood, in the presence of so many military bunkers and the gaze of so many unknown men inside them, I suddenly became aware of my body and its contours. My breasts had just assumed their distinct, slightly protruding shape. I felt naked. I tried to fold into the school bag clutched in front of me. That was how I developed a hunch in my upper back. After I reached home, in a dazed state, I packed a white dupatta into my school bag. Since then, I never left home without a chador that would cover my body every day. So you see, I wanted to become invisible. I wanted to sort of disappear because the gaze was a very different gaze. It's the gaze that is making your father sort of assemble somewhere, people who are supposed to protect you, it's making them vulnerable. So you feel there's a threat within a threat. I mean, I also read other as a young girl, I used to read Little Women a lot. And as I grew older, I tried to make sense of it. Why was it so important to me? When I started reading more coming of age girls' stories, like there is Elena Ferrante, I read her book, My Brilliant Friend, a lot. It was really to imagine what are the challenges of normal childhood. And when we talk about safety, so there is bullying. Girls or kids want to bunk school. They want to go swimming. But we had no such, I mean, I wouldn't have thought of any of these things. Like I don't remember going for a picnic when I was growing up because there was no way you could have taken that risk or parents would have allowed. So I have to read other literature to imagine challenges of what safety or an absence of safety might mean. But in a conflict zone, challenges are really about survival. And this is also, I mean, I also want to drop this caveat here that this is also from the 90s. Now, a lot has changed from then. This was an account which was missing in the current landscape, literary landscape that we have. But I understand from your point of view that what does safety mean to women today? Because now women are coming out. They are sort of trying to make use of their agency. They are trying to become journalists. They're trying to go and cover like encounters, etc. because the conflict is still on, right? So there are opportunities there, but there are probably questions that we'll have to think of differently of what safety sort of means for women in that zone.
Hmm. Yeah, I think this I'm just kind of thinking about it. Also, I connects it. I'm connecting it back to the fact that even though you're right, women are coming to the forefront and they're kind of working as photojournalists. There was one photojournalist, I think, who was detained
Yeah.
recently. Yeah, so they are doing that, but at the same point of time, it's still not being made easy, right?
No.
It's still equally. I don't know if I would say it's equally difficult, but I would say it is very difficult to the point where earlier, of course, no one could even perceive that happening. Now you can perceive that happening. But also maybe that also leads me to my next question, which is you've also worked as a photojournalist, right? Did your lived experiences influence your need to share the stories of the voiceless with the world, as in your experiences of living in Kashmir?
Yeah, so when I was working as a photojournalist with Reuters in Singapore, I was a sub editor, and of course, we had some assignments that we would do because nothing much happens in Singapore. It's a fairly safe place.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I was with Reuters from 2005 to 2008, and this is when we are talking about Iraq War.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking about Guantanamo Bay. We are talking about Obama's first campaign. So, and we're also talking about Intifada in Palestine. So, I used to see this, and I used to be honest, my life, I mean, armed insurgency, when it erupted in Kashmir, it happened on a particular day. It was a normal day in 1989. It was on the eve of Eid.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to go for a haircut with my sister, and I wanted to go to a particular salon. And I was pestering my mom for a few days and my grandmother, and they finally let me.
Mm-hmm.
We go into the salon, we walk into the salon. By the time we come out, there has been the first incident of firing, a shootout in the city, and everything was shut, and a curfew was announced for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 1 hour which changed everything. The world turned upside down. And it was for a girl I was 12 at that point.
Mm-hmm.
For that massive shift, it really took me about, and probably our whole generation, about a decade to process what had really happened.
Right.
So by the time I was in Singapore, I was reading up and I was trying to make sense of what was happening back home. And when I used to see the kind of press Iraq or Palestine, etc., was getting, I was feeling a sense of urgency that I wasn't able to articulate.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there used to be these news features that Reuters at that point had access to Times Square directly, and you could choose a picture every hour and send it to Times Square. And I used to just take that opportunity to just sneak out photos to Times Square from Kashmir. And my editor was like, nobody is going to care about this. I mean, they're paying us for it. You can't just send anything there. So he was right. I had no answer for him then. But that's when I realized that urgency just set in at that point. That what we are enduring and what we have endured as a people, we also the world needs to know. I mean, world in most of the cases just, there are other factors which sort of determine these conflicts. So there might not really be a ground change on the ground, but the world at least needs to know, like common people, ordinary people need to empathize. But if you don't know what's happening, what are you going to empathize with?
Absolutely.
And in fact, when I was growing up and insurgency erupted in 1989, I used to naively think, oh, people don't know about us because the Berlin Wall was brought down in 1989. Tiananmen Square happened around that time. The Dalai Lama won the Nobel Prize. So world doesn't know enough about us. So the onus is on us to go and tell the world our stories.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a very important point. The onus lies with us. And I think once we kind of feel that sense of responsibility, that's when action starts. And which is how I kind of also saw your book, right? Like, for me, at least I saw it as you kind of using your voice through Rumours of Spring and kind of trying to get the world to know what's happening. But tell me, did it help you come to terms with the experiences of living in a war zone? Did it kind of help you, kind of address it in some way, maybe?
When I started writing, I also started realizing traumas that I didn't know that I was carrying in me. There were like many psychosomatic things, like literally things which I had. There was an incident linked where I sort of, my knees started shivering, and that continued for about 15 years. And I was exercising, etc. When I wrote that particular chapter, and I thought about that properly, and that knee ache was gone. And then I spoke to my doctor, and he's like, psychosomatic traumas are basically traumas. Psychosomatic diseases are traumas you carry in your body. So that is one minor detail. But to be honest, the book is largely centered around my grandmother's funeral, who dies of natural causes. But it's one night, and it's the night of her funeral. And this is a creative device that I used, her funeral. And when I finished the draft, it went through a few structural changes, right? So it was basically, you see in a lot of conflict literature or literature coming from conflict zones that sometimes memoirs just come out as diaries. Like if you see Anne Frank's, for example, I mean, she's someone who left behind that iconic book. Whether it's her diary or whether there is this Palestinian writer called Raja Shahide. There is Occupation Walks or Palestinian Diaries. There is Suad Amiri. Again, it's an accepted format that you can just write what's happening and put it together, or put it together thematically. But when I spent time with the drafts, I realized I hadn't written much about after my grandmother's death. And I realized for a young girl, a child, I was very close to her. And she was probably in her early 80s or late 70s, and she was being exposed to a world which was foreign. She had never seen what was happening around her, that kind of militarization, those kind of human rights violations, where her own daughter survived a massacre, and many other were killed and survived massacres. She had no idea what was going on. So I saw this woman who was this tall, elegant woman of great stature in my life shrivel up. She started shrinking, and it was very metaphoric in that way. It was very symbolic. It's like what you know as protection, what you know as a stable anchor, starts really diminishing in the face of that colossal militarization and the conflict, like how your safe spaces start shrinking. So then I realized that I was going to basically anchor this entire story around her death. It was my way of sort of giving her that honor, honoring her memory, so it was that. So it didn't give me the voice really, but it really helped me come to terms with a lot that I didn't even know was in me.
That's wonderful. And I think that's one thing that kind of comes through this, which is something we're learning as designers, service designers as well, that safety isn't necessarily always a place. It can also be a person, right? Feeling safe, the sentiment itself. So, as designers, when we look at it, are we also looking at the relationships that you have as peer, with different people? How can those relationships be nurtured? How can we identify, people, champions within society who are, who become those safe spaces for people, like you've mentioned in your story. And maybe I want to kind of lead towards the last question now, slightly longer as a question, which is, so what advice would you give to individuals who are playing an active role in trying to shape society positively for women? And I'm particularly, obviously, saying this in keeping in mind the designers who are listening to this right now, or who are going to be listening to this once we post this online. So what advice would you give to them, whether they're designers, whether they're people working with governments, grassroots organizations, journalists? What would you want them to consider in their practices when designing for safety?
See, we're still grappling with it's a very important question, but it's a really broad question, and I don't really have the solution for it. But there was this series which was called Unbelievable. It was one of the top series on Netflix, I think, last year.
Yeah.
It's about a rape victim, and it shows how men and women sort of deal with when they are dealing with, when they sort of exercise empathy. So she goes for these statements to the police station, and they've shown the contrast. A man, when he speaks to her and questions her, as opposed, and then she feels very violated each time she's asked those questions, and she has to live that horrific experience. And then something happens, and the case is transferred to a woman, and the way she sort of speaks to her. I think the important first is to acknowledge the difference, and there might be different ways to look. Like what you mentioned, safety could. There's not one. Safety is not a measure. It can be a person, it can be a state of mind, it can be an enabled environment. So, and it will all depend on different geographies. It will all depend on different cultures. So, understanding safety inherently in that particular culture, in that particular geography, and also looking at things from women's point of view. I mean, we're still struggling with men taking decisions on abortions and women's reproductive systems, but this is also something where we need women's participation more to even to design those measures and implement safety measures. So it's a collaborative process, but I think we'll have to at all points keep in mind that there'll have to be a collaborative process, and women are actually a very important party in this.
Absolutely. And you've seen that also working as in your profession, right? As an advertising executive, as a senior executive within who kind of also creates strategies for different brands and media. You've probably seen the need for that there as well, right? So that's also something that maybe we are painfully aware of. Maybe need to bring that to into different organization structures as well. Need to bring it into the way we conduct our businesses as well.
Yeah, my sister recently got she works in Singapore, and she got a job. And the first thing she told me is, you know what, I have fertility, I have dental insurance, I have fertility insurance as well. And my partner gets it as well. So I was like, okay, there's finally someone who is thinking of a woman as a woman. It's not a token period leave that you're giving your employees.
Exactly.
But you look fundamentally at treating a woman's body differently and looking at it differently and seeing that they have certain challenges after a certain age. Maybe, she might need a medical intervention to conceive. So that was something that I hadn't heard ever. I mean, I worked globally in many organizations. And you would get holiday allowance, you would get clothes allowance, but to give a fertility allowance under medical, I thought was something very refreshing and very welcome. And in advertising, like you said, I mean, we only think about these things there when it's a Women's Day, International Women's Day, or
absolutely
the brands want to look good. But nobody really thinks about these things fundamentally. And I think the world would be so much better, and probably brands would start, there would be more affinity, genuinely. Because I think women are still seen as these secondary buyers.
Right.
Other than certain categories, they're really not. I mean, I remember once I was working on a furniture brand, and I had to convince the creatives that women make the payment, and they were like, you don't know anything. And they had to mount an entire research and to see that actually woman is the main decision maker.
Right.
Because it's furniture, a man knows better. What will women know about certain kind of wood and all? So those biases also exist in the very educated, in the cultural elite also, which have to be sort of spoken about, and they have to be highlighted where they
exist. Yeah, I think that's what we want to also challenge. But and one way that we're trying to kind of look at that is through communication, but also kind of designing, these checks and balances within organizations, within structures, within policy, and be able to kind of use design for that. I think that's something that we want to achieve, and we want to start talking about it in design circles. That's very important. Maybe this would be one of the first talks of that nature to ever happen. And let's see, hopefully this could be the start of something, hopefully fantastic and good, that will kind of help to work together with the people of Kashmir towards coming to a solution that really benefits them as individuals, as human beings, as a community, etc. So so I think now what we can do is we can open the floor to questions. If the audience wants, they can share their questions in the chat, or they can just switch on their mics and kind of just pose their questions directly. that's okay. Any questions that you might have for Farah? I will also post a link of her book in the chat. It's not available in the UK yet. I think it's only available in India currently, but hopefully it will be available very soon. It's available on Kindle though, if I'm not mistaken. Correct, Farah?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, it's available on Kindle for those who read their books on Kindle. But if you prefer, like me, if you prefer books to be like a hard copy, then you're gonna have to wait for a little while, like I am.
Thank you.
So yeah. Any questions, guys? Anybody would like to ask anything to Farah about her experiences or about designing, particularly keeping this issue in mind? Also, I think it merits to mention that one of the things you were mentioning, until kind of people get their questions together. One of the things that you were mentioning was about how women, particularly, are seen as secondary buyers. So we had a very interesting talk yesterday with this individual called Kiki Gao from China yesterday, and she was talking about how in China that perception is changing phenomenally. Like now, women are seen as the key economic decision makers for a lot of sectors, and in a lot of investors, particularly who are looking to invest in businesses, are now talking to women with that perspective rather than seeing them as just a secondary audience. So there is a slow but positive, concerted effort towards that. Maybe it's a shift that we'll see, hopefully, with Kashmir as well.
China, we had started seeing that, I think, about 10 years ago when I used to do research there.
Nice.
So women were really becoming independent and delaying the age of marriage, etc. They were pushing it.
Mm-hmm.
They were going for radical changes to their body. They were taking a year off and adding height to basically to elongate their legs. They used to go for this bone operation. They used to break their bones.
Okay.
And so there's like documentaries on that. So they were really taking charge, and it's not happened overnight.
Right.
And then when we're feeling threatened,
mm-hmm.
and so there is this. There used to be this segment where men would like literally, in Indian culture, that they used to be. In the olden tradition, there used to be this whole thing of swamvar, where a woman gets to choose a husband from a line of suitors. That was something that was happening in China about 10 years ago.
Nice.
So it's about time that they are now taken seriously as equals.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's something that hopefully, yeah, that's something we need to.
In many other places also.
Yeah, but I think that's something we need to start considering as well in India. So yeah, any questions, guys? Ken, Ming, Dan, any questions particularly that you may have? Cool.
Actually, I think because I did some research and I discovered that actually women's leadership actually has attracted a lot of attention. So I want to know, in your opinion, do you think it's very important, and why it's important? And do you have what's main challenge will women face in this area? Yeah, and yes.
See, I think what we've right now seen, even in the age of pandemic, Jacinta Ardern's leadership has been so exemplary, and the way she has handled pandemic, and she's also gotten like cynics say, oh, New Zealand is such a small country. Of course, anyone could manage that. But if you have to mess up, you can mess up any place. And we've also seen in, women leaders are coming to center stage with Kamala Harris becoming the VP. So there is a lot of focus on women being given that, women being entrusted with leadership roles, but there's still a very long ground to cover. But this is what it does, is it really gives moral courage. It gives other women, it inspires other women. So it's sometimes we might have the courage, but we just need that little nudge. And when we see someone else doing it from the background, the kind of background Kamala Harris has, Vice President of the United States, like she comes from an immigrant family, with a very prominent. Her mother was very important in her life. So other women also feel inspired and they get that courage and they're like, maybe I can do the same as well. So Singapore also used to have. I don't remember many women in senior jobs, but media especially. There were a lot of, when I now think back, maybe it was not as women. I mean, I have lived in Singapore from 2001 to 2013. I still do remember a lot of men, but women were still treated. I mean, they still had a lot of opportunities. There was safety of a different kind. But now we see with gender taking the center stage in world talks after Me Too, especially, they're feeling more confident. We're feeling that we can also achieve what we set out to do. I mean, there's still a lot of challenges. I mean, especially in South Asia or even Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, Japan, South Asia, which are inherently very patriarchal societies. There's a lot of ground to cover. So opportunities sort of become fewer for women, but I think once we have an infrastructure or the initiative that you have just created, I think it's just going to help women. It's especially the ones who are ready, and then the others will follow.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Ming. I also feel women more than there's a lot of conditioning that we go through, social conditioning, that we're not good enough. We have certain physical limitations of, again, safety being one. We can't go out after a certain time, after dark. So there are lots of obstacles that we have grown up with, and they probably have a hold on our minds. Sometimes I feel it sits in the heads, and there are also these patriarchal like men who want to keep that patriarchy going on, and they will sometimes appear in the most progressive disguise. But if they're deep down they're patriarchal. I'll give you an example. I was reading this. I was going through my bookshelf the other day. I had this book by the Ebbetside, the professor at Columbia. It was interviews, and when we buy books, we write something on them. So I'd written January 2011, and I remember an incident. There was this friend who was very progressive on the outside, and he said, "What are you reading?" I said, "I'm reading this book by Edward Said." And he's like, "What do you understand?" And he and I were the same age. And he was a student of literature, I was a student of literature. And it's that, this whole thought that men and women are brought up in South Asia, that men have a better brain, or I don't know, women are good for just, doing a certain set of things. And then it's the same bias that a lot of drivers have. Oh, if it's a bad driver, it must be a woman. So women don't use the full capacity of their brain, right? So the basic, denying them basic equality, whether it's thinking, whether it's doing certain things, which should be done at a human level, not at a man versus woman level. But the social conditioning has been such that women are seen as these lesser, inferior thinkers or doers. So it's also very important, I feel, to sort of start to keep believing in yourself. You do have self doubts, and also because men can be vocal and there is a tendency for women from certain conservative societies to easily shut up because that's what they have been taught all their lives. You give bad name to the family or you spoil your reputation. I think it's also to overcome those fears and start believing in oneself that we are equals and we're good enough to do whatever we think we want to do. I don't know if that answers your question.
Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi Farah. I'm Dan, and I have a question. And yeah, I'm really interested about the story that I share, and I want to say that I grew up in China, and I always feel safe about the physical environment. But until that, I realized that others are thinking that I'm as a female, that will really make me feel unsafe, because when others, they are just objectify or they are just sexualize women, and I will feel unsafe. And my major project is about doing a dating app for women, because when women using the dating app, they will take more risks than the men. And during the interview that I made, and I really find that when I talking about the woman and man, they have different reaction, because like the man would say, why women will feel unsafe when they're using the dating app, but when women listen to my idea, and they will feel, wow, that's really interesting and it's very necessary. So I want to know about your opinion about that.
So I understand. I think the minute you get on a dating app, people assume, oh, you're very progressive, very, very modern, and not always in a positive sense. They think you've passed. I wouldn't say lose, but they'll say, oh, we can take a chance. And I mean, there's also there have been studies and instances where in South Asia, a lot of men still don't treat dating apps as serious places to meet the women they want to spend the rest of their lives with. So there's while women might feel that it's an empowering thing to be there, but like I was talking about in my previous answer, there's also the social conditioning, which where men or societies tell us about certain kinds of behaviors by nice women, and certain kinds of behaviors do not belong to nice women. So I'm not so sure that getting on an app is necessarily seen as uh, is sort of, I mean, it's a great step. I mean, don't get me wrong, but it's also, especially I'm talking in South Asian context, it's still seen as someone who's there to just have fun and not treated with as much respect. Respect is a word that I use with caution. I mean, it's again a very social construct. It's a constructed framework which is there to oppress people. But there are still a lot of challenges. There are still horror stories. Like if you go on certain, like Instagram has this Tinder nightmare, and you actually read stuff there which is very surprising in today's world, to think, oh, there are woke men and women out there, and woke men would know how to talk and what to say, but women still get creepy messages. They still feel unsafe there. A lot of women have inhibitions about putting photographs. A man can be without a shirtless on a dating app, and nobody is going to bat an eyelid, and he's probably thinking that I'm going to get more matches. But a woman can put a photo in a skimpy dress. There will be comments, she'll be judged. So there are also barriers mentally. I think we also have to think at a behavioral level. What are the
Yeah.
changes rather than cosmetic, which Musa was earlier talking about in advertising, for example, or in certain cases, the change that we see or some brands want to bring about it is as at a very cosmetic level. But what are the behavioral things that one wants to change in a society is something we also probably need to think about. Like, how can that happen? I mean, Bumble is doing a great job by letting women choose who they want to match with. But are there any? But after that is done, a guy can still say
Yeah.
things, behave in a certain way. So, how do you how do you bring about that change? I mean, should the communication reflect then? Should there be conversations around that?
Yeah, that's very interesting actually. How do we kind of also build safety within UI, UX, and the user experience? Then you're talking about, let's say, Bumble, for example. It goes beyond the app. After you've kind of after you've done matching, you go and meet somebody. How can we then influence that? And that can only happen through behavior change. So yeah, that's a deep.
Human means a human, not it's not a power dynamic that you're playing. Oh, I'm going to judge you, and you're a loose woman, and you've come to me after a dating app or whatever. So at a fundamental behavioral level.
Right. I think, yeah, there's also this systemic, this, like you said, there's also this systemic oppression that perhaps a lot of systems or a lot of apps like this, which perhaps have permeated into daily life, perpetuate. Like you mentioned, it can be a source of judgment. It can be a source of even how do you say, self-confidence, a sense of self that, I'm kind of looking at this and saying that I'm judging my confidence based on how many matches I get or don't get. And that itself, again, becomes another issue. So it leads into a lot of new systemic issues, which then need to be tackled as well. Maybe designers need to be able to consider that. And yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good point because I always feel the same when I just sharing some pictures on my social media and maybe just some stranger will just judge you and that always made me feel very angry. Even he just a stranger and I really feel that it's really made me angry sometimes.
Yeah.
And that can work on your against your self-confidence. You just feel, I mean, that can take you might have taken 10 steps forward to take that decision of putting that photo up, and that one stray comment from a stranger can set you 20 steps back. Because women are just trying to develop that kind of confidence where they feel firmly their feet planted on the ground. But yeah, one stray comment can just throw you off.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. How can we design kindness and care into different or kind of look at different issues from a lens of kindness and care? That will be very important, whether it's and it can be a large spectrum. It can be something as big as the Kashmir issue, or it can be as everyday as dating and relationships as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it means it has to safety. What we are talking about, it has to look at cultures and societies individually, and one can't just have like one blanket solution. I feel for everyone.
Cool. All right. I think we are nearing the end of our talk, and I just want to say, Farah, thank you so much for doing this.
I hope it was useful in some way.
No, yeah, it's going to be really, really. It's honestly going to be really useful, and like I said, this is going to be something that's also going to go up on social media. We're going to be sharing this, and then it becomes something that we share with the larger designer groups and students from across the university as well. So this is the start of something that we are hoping will eventually set off a lot of events in motion that will eventually help us to get this topic in discussion. Yeah. Thank you so much, Farah. And anybody, sorry, I'll just add one more thing. Anybody who wants to kind of check out the book, it's available on Amazon. Please go and Google it. It's actually amazing. I'm waiting to read it, and you guys should check it out as well. Yeah.
You should really send me your address. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Farah.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Darman. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.